is up? I'm Rick, the Fat Man GM. You may or may have not have heard of me mabbling and rambling on a few of the YouTube channels and Facebook channels regarding to our hobby, role-playing games in general, tabletop games, wargaming, so on, etc. I have started back when I was in my early teens. I have well over 40 years worth of experience in this hobby that we love and share. And a big part of what I like to do is go back and revisit a lot of the stuff that I have and have accumulated in my gaming career, if you will. And everything from MERP, Starfleet, from FASA, a slew of Dungeons and Dragons and Shadowrun, Star Wars, etc., etc., etc. And I revisit these items individually, and hopefully to give some nostalgia for myself, to give you a little bit of an insight into some game system that you may or may not have heard of or may have not had the opportunity to play, and to remind those of us out there that do have them that these are quite viable and still entertaining today. So here we go. Alright then, it's this talking head Fat Man back at you again, because I have another thing that popped up in one of my earlier videos I'm working on. I wanted to touch base on a little bit. I've occasionally, the only time it seems like I get extended, I don't want to call it a mini vacation, but extended time off is when the truck I work on fails. And at this point we have an issue with a pump, a little gear in the pump that keeps wanting to tear it apart, and we have engaged a specialist to come out and fix it, except he was supposed to do it yesterday, then he said today, now it will be Sunday. So you're gonna end up with 5 days, some lost hours and stuff. But hey, you're not here for that, right? You're not here for that. It seemed to me this is a common occurrence to a lot of novice GMs and some experienced GMs too, in various role-playing game systems. That it doesn't matter what the genre is, that there's this mindset, this all or nothing when it comes to their encounters. So I don't buy into that. I believe that most intelligent beings and semi-intelligent creatures and animals and humanoids and what have you are quite keen on self-preservation, that they have a point that they want to not continue the scenario where they're going to die, or you see. So it's not something that's covered in too many game systems. I honestly have sat back trying to think of the 6 or 7 different versions of the D&D that I have, and I don't recall it ever coming up anywhere in any of them. It's like an absent thought. It should be there, but for whatever reason it was either considered common sense, where we use our brain to supplement all the fantastic, wonderful stuff that comes with the game material that we're using, and or we should see the obvious without it needing to be put in front of us in print, although that's usually the most often when it needs to be put in print, because we're so oblivious to it, or we assume because it's not there it's not important. That said, I can think of one reoccurring encounter comes back in my mind. A friend of mine was running a game, it was about 6 years ago, and he's a great guy, really is. He tries hard. He really loves Dungeons & Dragons. He loves all role-playing games, without a doubt. But as GMs go, I don't think he's ever quite got out of that novice. He has issues with reading a little bit, so he's not keen on reading a lot of stuff. He doesn't read novels and things like I do. He does read the game supplements, but he keeps going through them over and over again in increments, right? So he eventually gets it. He can see through stone given time. One of his problems, and it's not just him, but I'm not picking on him, not picking on you, Fuzzface, but that's Kenny, that's just the way it rolls out. But I see this a lot, is this need or desire for the all or nothing conflict combat. So in this scenario, our little adventuring group had gone into a town, and we were set upon by some local rogues and thugs, and they outnumbered us 2-1. And we outgunned them 4-1. He just read out of the book. He took straight out of the Masha manual and out of the book, and just added extras, but they weren't sufficient. You should have had 20 or 30 of them there to really give our group a serious challenge. And even then, that's ridiculous, right? So in this case, we had, I don't know, quite a few. And we mowed through half of them in the first round. And it was pretty ugly, pretty fast. And yet the rogues, the thugs, kept right on coming. See, I don't buy into that. I believe that they're intelligent beings. These were humans for the most part, and at some point they have this, and not exactly brave humans, or they'd be out there adventuring, as opposed to thuggery in the back alley someplace, picking on what they think are harmless or weaker foes than themselves. Should have a heightened sense of self-preservation. They should have ran away. The minute we had laid into them, that first 6 seconds of combat, that next 6 seconds of combat should have been one of those later, right? And at least by the third round, the handful that were left and we were urging to run away should have ran away instead of fighting to the death. And Kenny didn't quite get that in his head, and I see that a lot. And it's not just the GMs. I see players, let's murder them all, because that's where the murder hobo mindset gets its claws in. We gotta kill everything. And there's value to that, but there's story value for not doing it. You gain a little bit of infamy or fame for being being merciful to your opponents. Another thing is perhaps you don't decimate the entire city's thieves guild in one go. So perhaps there might be some reoccurring encounters, right, and so on and so forth. One of my ways, of course, of handling scenarios like that is first I take into account the overall group's capability and the experience of the players behind the characters. And I think, okay, if I'm going to have some thugs jump them in the alley, there's going to be some heavy muscle thugs who are upper level, decent enough to make a serious challenge to the opponents with weapons and armor to give them a fighting chance, backed up perhaps by 1 or 2 casters that can give them some ranged firepower. Potentially, if we're talking a bunch of rogues, they're going to ambush the party in all this that entails, using stealth, using their hide, sneak, what have you, and jump them from behind, or try to shoot them from the rooftops and then disappear. It's a hit and run. I mean, if we're here to get your loot, okay, you can't do a hit and run, but you can still attack from behind and maybe go for the items. The process of the brawl, so the rogue cuts your purse strings and takes off with your bag of holding. Yeah, see, that's an idea, right? As opposed to just having them fight it out to the death. And this carries over into the wilderness too, and in dungeon encounters and things like this. Most animals, most magical beasts, and that are semi-intelligent, or even baseline animal mindsets, they have a point when they realize that their life is in danger, and they just want to get away. They leave. And maybe their first attempt at killing your party fails, and they get badly hurt. It's time for them to withdraw and to go back and go somewhere and lick their wounds and so on and so forth. Some of the more intelligent ones might go back and brood over it and then come back after your party or a member of your party at a later time, potentially adding to your list of potential encounters for further play in your campaign world. Just saying. So in my opinion, as the techniques go, that it's probably better to not fight your opponents to the death. I mean, as a GM, as a technique, I find it much more satisfying that if my encounters are briefer and smarter, right? I mean, we've seen those. Most of us have seen those scenarios, those tabletop encounters where combat can take hours, literal hours in game, because we're trying to eliminate a foe. We're trying to kill them off, and by not, if they're in a corner and they have nowhere to go, okay. If they absolutely have to go, we have to kill them, then okay. But in nine out of 10 situations, you get jumped by some bugbears and you knock out half of them. The bugbears are usually going to turn around and run away. They're not mindless. They're not mindless automatons. There are things, encounters, magic critters, and so forth. Certain types of beings that absolutely will not retreat, and you have to destroy them because that's how they're programmed or conditioned or whatever. Part of the scenario. But should that be the every scenario in your campaign? I can't say one way or another. It's something worth giving some thought to a little bit anyway, right? In my opinion. So, give them a break, right? Give them a chance.